Sometimes I think about how the brains that brought us Magical Girl classic Cardcaptor Sakura also brought us Kakyoin Lays an Egg, of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fanwork infamy. The duality of women. If you've been a fan of anime and manga over the years, then there's a pretty good chance you've come across something created by the minds at Clamp. They have a pretty distinct style that's pretty easy to spot once you've seen a couple of examples. Clamp also has a wide variety of series that span different genres and demographics. They have it all. Beloved shoujo series for younger girls and teenagers, shonen series for the younger boys and teenagers, a single josei series for adult women, and even seinen series for adult men. All four major demographics that manga is usually classified by. Theoretically, there's something here for everyone. Clamp has become a group with many popular works, a few of which were staples in the American anime and manga community, and the group has had a sizable influence on the industry as a whole. Today, I want to sit down and discuss the history of Clamp and take a look at just how exactly they have influenced these mediums that I love so much. So without further ado, what and who is Clamp? Clamp started in the mid-80s as a group of 11 art students making doujinshis, which is fan-made, self-published manga, to fill in a booth vacancy at the event Dream Comic. Some members of the group had started creating manga inspired by their friends while in high school. Clamp was a group of friends before they became one of the most well-known mangaka groups on the planet. The group would meet periodically at different events in Osaka and Kobe, and over time the numbers dwindled down to 4 main members. Many of their doujins focused on Captain Tsubasa, Saint Seiya, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and that does include yaoi. A lot of shonen series spawn enthusiastic fujoshi fan bases due to lack of female characters or the lack of well-written ones, and most of the chemistry tends to be between male characters. Intentional or not, a lot of these friendships end up being written with romantic or sexual undertones. Those are the character dynamics that push the main characters in a way that a romantic relationship would. Those are the character dynamics that create an intense bond or a deep meaning to the main characters in a way that a romantic relationship normally would. Not that these have to be romantic, but in a world that places importance and focus on romance, it makes sense that fans would seek out and place romance where there may not actually be any. But also, some of these shonen series make it hard to believe anything else is possible between their characters, like romance is the only thing that makes sense for certain dynamics. And we've all heard about cashing in on the Fujo bucks, right? These people love the characters, will buy merch, and engage with the media in a fanatical way, driving sales and generating popularity. I see this sentiment a lot when I see shonen bros say that we ought to thank Fujoshis for keeping their shonen series alive. I don't know if that's a hot take, I just think it's kind of interesting. It's a pattern that I've noticed. And Clamp was a part of this pattern, a part of this culture. I'd even go as far to say that their roots in this doujinshi and fujoshi circles influenced their original works, since they often include queer characters, be it for genuine representation and exploration, or as an unserious side character. After honing their manga skills, in 1987 the group decided to move on from fan works to creating their own original manga, starting with a loose adaptation of the Rig Veda, one of the 4 sacred canonical Hindu texts, one of the oldest known Vedic Sanskrit texts. It's believed that some aspects of Rig Veda had been passed around orally since the 2nd millennium BC, though this isn't a proven fact, but philological and linguistic evidence does suggest that the bulk of Rig Veda was composed somewhere between 1500 and 1000 BC. All this to say, Rig Veda is a really old story and would be comparable in age to something like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and would be a lot older than the Odyssey. Rig Veda, the Clamp manga, is a fantasy drama about fulfilling a prophecy in order to overthrow a tyrannical leader and warlord who had killed the previous heavenly emperor. The manga is a feast of detailed artwork. It was also notable for its depictions of queer relationships and even having their main protagonist, Ashura, be a gender, meaning they're genderless. A big win for non-binary Clamp fans. Being their official debut manga, Rig Veda holds a special place in Clamp history, and sets the tone for what to expect from the group in a more professional sense. Now seen as one of their more underrated works, Rig Veda was received well when it first started publishing, and was popular enough to receive 2 anime OVAs both in 1991 and 1992. While it was initially self-published, Rig Veda did catch the attention of publisher Shinsokan, and the series was officially published in the action fantasy shoujo magazine Wings. From 1989 to the finale in 1996, Rig Veda ran with success. They even totally sold out of the first print of the first volume when the manga began releasing in the Tangoban format. After the early success of Rig Veda, Clamp began working on other series as well. Being a group working on multiple ongoing series at once probably was a lot more manageable. The early 90s brought many Clamp works, multi-chapter series, short works from monthly magazines, one-shots, long-running series. They did a little bit of everything, but we'll primarily be looking at the works that were later released in a Tangoban format, since these works are the most accessible and the works that were brought over to the US and became what we think of when we think of Clamp. Because in case it needs to be said, a lot of my anime and manga and community analysis does come from a primarily American perspective, especially when it comes to like fandom and community. Between the years of 1990 and 1993, the group started 10 multi-chapter works that were later released in a Tankoban form, most of which were only 1 volume or just a handful, with a couple of standout series having 6 to 7 volumes. In order of publication, we start with Man of Many Faces, a story about a young boy who steals valuable items for his 2 mothers. Tokyo Babylon, a series about a young onmyoji sorcerer investigating strange murders and working to protect Tokyo from supernatural threats. Clamp School Detectives, an episodic series following a group of students who decide to be detectives in order to help out the girls in their school. Dukleon, Clamp School Defenders, a story that follows 2 students who are also monster-fighting superheroes of sorts. School Detectives and School Defenders and Man of Many Faces all share the same universe, by the way. They tie together. X, or X 1999, was an apocalyptic sequel to Tokyo Babylon, taking place 9 years later at the turn of the century or in the end times, because, you know, people did think the world was going to end in 2000, so that's probably an aspect to this. X follows a young psychic who has returned to fulfill his destiny as the one who will determine humanity's fate. This series was never actually finished, though, due to the tragedies depicted in the story mirroring the tragedies happening in real-life Japan at the time. And, you know, the graphic nature of their planned ending was just a little bit too much for the vibe of the time, and it was decided to just axe the project entirely instead of altering the ending to better satiate the palates of the public. Which, you know, I guess that's fair. Shirahime Syo, Snow Goddess Tales, is a series of loosely connected tragedies all centering around the legend of Shirahime, a goddess whose tears turn to snow. Legend of Chunhyang, a historical fantasy based loosely on a Korean folktale of the same name. It tells the story of a girl whose village has been taken over by a cruel warlord, and the budding romance between the girl and a boy who tries to help her. Magic Knight Rayearth, a magical girl isekai series about middle school girls who are transported to a magical world where they have to rescue the princess. Miyuki-chan in Wonderland, a comedy yuri manga about a girl who gets transported to several different fantastical worlds where half-naked women want to have their way with her. And The One I Love, an anthology series following different women as they struggle with the complications of being in love. We've got everything from fantasy, comedy, drama, mystery, slice of life, yuri. They have it all. They're just writing whatever, and I really respect that. I also can see this variety in genres and demographics being what allows Clamp to not only tell many different kinds of stories, cultivating a space for creativity to flow out of the box, but also probably helping them prevent creative burnout. You see it all the time with like content creators or just anyone who does a lot of the same thing. They just get burnt out, whether it's boredom, exhaustion, just being pushed to far past their limits. But having this variety set up in the things that they are allowed to explore narratively and artistically, I think puts Clamp in a spot where if they get burnt out of doing one style of things, they can swap to something else. They keep some variety to spice up their life. Out of the works published during the early 90s, Tokyo Babylon is the most notable. Many of their works were well received and popular enough for anime adaptations, but Tokyo Babylon quickly rose to fame, drawing interest to its occult elements and social themes. Tokyo Babylon is also credited with being one of the first mainstream series to include a homosexual relationship. This is a point of praise that I see brought up a lot in regards to like Western fans. I'm not sure if it's as big of a deal to Japanese readers, but I mean, it could be. Everyone's always excited to have representation. Tokyo Babylon is actually based on a one-shot that the head writer, Nanase Okawa, wrote previously, which I think is neat. I love seeing a story evolve past its humble beginnings and become something bigger than it was ever imagined it was going to be. Tokyo Babylon seems to be one of the more widely known works out of this early selection, and is still pretty popular to this day, with Yen Press announcing in 2023 that they'd licensed the Clamp Premium Edition of this manga. So someone thinks that this series from the early 90s is still relevant enough to sell, even if that is just to Clamp fanatics and people interested in manga from the 90s. As we move into the later half of the 90s, Clamp continues to put out many different kinds of works, all overlapping in their publishing run. But we only see 5 new series that start between the years of 1995 and 1999. However, this is worth mentioning, most of their previous series ran until the mid-90s, the latest running one wrapping up in 1996. So they had a lot on their plate. In order of what started first, we saw iconic manga such as Wish, a story about a doctor who saves an angel and is offered a wish in return. Cardcaptor Sakura, a now classic magical girl series following a young girl who has to fight restless spirits and recover special cards. Clover, a dystopian story about a girl with psychic powers who seeks freedom. Angelic Layer, a story that follows a girl who is an inspiring player in a game that utilizes dolls that the players control with their minds. And Suki, a like story, a romance mystery that follows a childish teenager and her first crush and I think subsequent relationship with her teacher. I'll be so real, gang. I'm familiar with a lot of Clamp works, but I've never actually read them. Or at least not all of them. But that's what it seemed like a like story was about. Wish, Clover, Angelic Layer, and Suki all had English translations distributed by Tokyopop in the 2000s. Rest in peace to Tokyopop. It's still around, but you know. Some of these works remained popular enough to receive a reprint in more recent years, but the big standout title in this bunch is by far Cardcaptor Sakura, a magical girl series that to this day is still widely iconic and popular. Collector's edition reprints of the manga in 2019, Blu-ray releases of the anime as recent as 2021, and might I say, the anime is not recent. It's an old anime. Cardcaptor Sakura is easily one of the most recognizable and well-known Clamp works in all time. Anime adaptations, movies, games, countless toys and collectibles, fast food tie-ins, this series made a mark, and is considered a classic for a reason. However, beyond the financial success, Cardcaptor Sakura left an impact due to the multiple queer characters featured in the series. Cardcaptor Sakura also changes the formula for magical girls, and remains one of the more unique titles in the genre. Sakura doesn't do Sailor Moon-esque transformations. She doesn't fight some big bad evil. She's just a kid who dresses up for fun, or, by the request of her best friend, and fights restless spirits that are contained in the cards that she is collecting. Sakura is also an elementary schooler, while most magical girls tend to be a bit older, giving Cardcaptor Sakura a wider appeal to younger children. And I will say, as someone who started watching this anime for the first time at the ripe age of 27, it's a fun, cute time that I think is enjoyable by all ages, especially if you're managing your expectations. It is a kid's show after all. Cardcaptor Sakura means a lot to many anime fans, especially those who grew up watching the anime. The series has won awards and as of 2018 has sold over 17 million copies of the manga. In many regards, it sits in a similar place to the likes of legends like Sailor Moon, iconic magical girl series that influenced entire generations of anime and manga fans. Series that bravely depicted queer characters and took steps to normalize such relationships and identities, and series that have greatly impacted those who watched them as children. And I think that's worth mentioning and celebrating. Throughout the 90s, Clamp put out a vast and diverse array of stories, and established a recognizable and intricate art style that set them apart from other mangaka. Their artwork felt alive, and the elegance was enticing. This era is also considered the golden age of Clamp, and I don't mean this in a, the 90s were just so much better for anime and manga that like some people mean when they say stuff like this. I don't think it's purely nostalgia talking, since the group shifted aspects of their style in the coming years, and a lot of Clamp fans preferred this maximalist, intricate art style. As we enter the 2000s, all of Clamp's previous works either wrap up or go on hiatus in the case of X. Clamp had solidified themselves as professionals, masters of their craft, and some even crowned them as the queens of shoujo. While they didn't only create shoujo manga, they did make iconic series and were able to break the barrier, publishing their works across several demographics and publishing shoujo manga that bridged the demographic gap and was appealing and marketable to many demographics. Many shoujo artists and mangaka find it hard to jump to other demographics, usually due to art style and story conventions that are typical of shoujo. Yes, shoujo is a demographic. It is not a genre, it is just a marketing demographic. However, it could also be considered an art style or an art genre of sorts. Colleen Manga Rex does very wonderful videos about shoujo and pointing out things that are very typical of shoujo and how to tell the difference between a shoujo and a shonen manga. But there are very distinct styles in paneling, the way that emotional beats are handled, that are very innate to shoujo manga that do not often show up in other demographics. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone or if that only makes sense to me because I binge watch a lot of Colleen Manga Rex videos. Clamp, however, found a way to blend elements of different genres and notions common in each of the gender and age demographics to create stories that were marketable to anyone. And I think this diversity in their stories is part of why they are considered the queens of shoujo. A demographic that's often reduced to the romance genre becomes very appreciative of stories that break that stereotype, especially stories that gain mainstream popularity beyond the niche market. And whenever Clamp made stories that were part of other demographics, they carried aspects of shoujo with them. With this grandiose reputation, the group continued to create. Although they departed from their more intricate art style in favor of something a bit more minimalistic, they still retained key elements that made clamp work recognizable. The 2000s brought us more iconic titles like Chobits, a sci-fi rom-com that explores human relationships with computers, with the main relationship being a human and a robot. Chobits is low-key known for some of the more interesting and sexually charged choices in the story, but knowing the series was created with adult men in mind and the context to what it's actually about, it all makes sense. It's not just some silly story that the kids in my high school had read when they were a little bit too young and giggled about because, you know, Americans are very uncomfortable about sexuality. I also want to say Chobits and Angelic Layer are in the same universe as well, which is kind of interesting. Legal Drug, later changed to Drug and Drop, is a supernatural mystery and comedy that follows a guy who's running from his past, and after being saved by a stranger who takes him to a drugstore, he begins working at said drugstore, and taking on odd jobs that make use of his supernatural powers after hours. This series went on hiatus in 2003 due to the magazine it was being published in kind of, going under, but resumed publication in 2011 under the new title Drug and Drop. Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles, an adventure series that tells the story of two close friends and their journey to recover one's scattered memories throughout different worlds and fight against their ill-fated destinies. This manga is notable for having crossovers and tie-ins with many of Clamp's previous and upcoming works. This was the first Clamp work I have ever read. I don't think I finished it, but what a place to start, you know? Holic is somewhat of a partner series to Tsubasa that follows a high school student that can see otherworldly creatures and finds himself working part-time for Yuko, the dimensional witch from Tsubasa, in order to pay for his own wish of wanting to leave the supernatural world behind. Holic also has a second series titled Holic Return that has been running on and off since the spring of 2013, and despite its many hiatuses, is still ongoing and planned to resume this year, supposedly. Kobato, a fantasy story about a girl with a mission to fill a mysterious bottle with people's healed hearts before 4 seasons end. Gate 7, another fantasy story that follows a teenager who's really into history as he encounters a warrior who fights supernatural enemies. Battles that go back to the Sengoku era in Japan, when warlords and other key figures attempted to defeat their rivals by forming blood contracts with powerful spiritual beings. So that's cool. In the late 2010s, Clamp also started working on a sequel series to Cardcaptor Sakura called Cardcaptor Sakura Clear Card, and that pretty much brings us up to the present of Clamp's original titles. It is worth mentioning that in 2004, the group released a 15th anniversary celebratory project that consisted of 12 volumes of full-color books that contained summaries and features of series, and interviews with Clamp, and also artwork and exclusive short comics. Just, in case you wanted to know about that. Throughout the 2000s and the 2010s, though, I believe their most notable works are a toss-up between Chobits and Holic. Those are the two that seemed to be the most popular and well-known amongst my peers growing up, and those are also the two that I still see talked about to this day, more so than other Clamp titles from this era. While Chobits was controversial for objectifying women, the theme still resonated with the audience and had people questioning their use of technology, and if tech can be a substitute for real life. A theme that is honestly still relevant today, maybe even more so relevant now than when it was written. I've noticed that about a lot of stories that were written about technology, especially like in the late 90s and early 2000s. It's like, wow. Apollo really granted them with prophecy, didn't he? Holic was also very successful, even abroad. In 2009, it was the 6th best-selling manga in the US, according to the New York Times. Fans enjoyed the way Holic retold some events from Tsubasa from a different perspective, and the humor in the series was a high point of praise. Holic was also one of the few manga in my high school library in 2011, so that's cool. That was like the other early exposure that I had to Clamp. Clamp has definitely made its mark and left a legacy in the anime and manga industries, including contributing to the anime and manga boom in the West, creating a more global market. They were widely popular on a global scale, being elected the 9th most popular manga artist from Japan in 2007 in Oricon's market research. And industry professionals and journalists in the US also named Clamp as one of the most successful creators of manga, especially amongst Western fans. Their stories were diverse and had wide appeal. Manga in general was super popular amongst the non-male comic readers, since the vast majority of American comics were marketed towards boys, and from an outsider's perspective, seemed to be primarily superhero stories, which doesn't actually have universal appeal. I don't know if that's a hot take. I never really cared for superhero stories. And I will admit, I do not look a whole lot into the American comic book industry. But it does, on a surface level, look like it is all Marvel and DC. Is there anything else? Who knows? I say knowing I have comic books that were written and made in America on my bookshelf that are not Marvel or DC. There was a seeming lack of diversity in the stories being told, and manga came onto the scene with any and everything on the pages, making manga a much more welcoming medium to get into if one was interested in reading comics. And there's also the notion that a lot of the more mainstream popular American comics, again, Marvel and DC, have such long-standing histories, it's a little hard to know where to start. And there was Clamp, with a wide variety of stories to license. I may be a tad off the mark here, but it is my understanding that if a publisher has already worked with a mangaka or even a magazine, it's a bit easier to license other works by that same mangaka or partnered with that same magazine. Be it less risky or the benefits of a pre-established business relationship, a partnership with Clamp would get you titles spanning all major demographics to market towards, and a wide variety of genres. It's usually a safe assumption to say fans of one work may like things made by the same group or person. Clamp, through their connected worlds and crossover projects, created a multiverse of sorts, and dedicated readers ate all of it up. It didn't matter that certain series may be from widely different genres. It had the Clamp touch, and if you enjoyed the Clamp touch, you were going to venture out into these other genres you may not have normally been a fan of. So it's easy to see how and why Clamp titles may have been so prevalent in the American manga market, and how they were such a huge force in popularizing the medium. While Clamp manga may be more synonymous with the 90s and 2000s, their influences are still felt today across the anime and manga industry, and not just in the prevalence of anime in American pop culture. Clamp has also collaborated with many anime and manga productions throughout the years, lending their talents for character designs and illustrations. I think the most recognizable would be Code Geass. They had their hands in that, and I think it's kind of obvious. Clamp does still do work with anime studios, and most recently worked with Netflix to produce an anime retelling of Grimm fairy tales, mixing their art style with a more modern anime style, so that's cool. The artwork is a very big part of what makes Clamp Clamp. Their original works incorporate the artwork into their storytelling, not just using art as a means to tell their story. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it pushes the art to do more. The way the group utilizes the visuals to heighten their work with symbolism and meticulous detail sets them apart, because manga is often constrained by very, very tight deadlines and commercial expectations, making it difficult for mangaka to really pour over their art in the way that Clamp appears to. This detail-oriented artwork, even in its more minimalistic versions, still managed to create a language with their visuals that get the audience to feel and empathize deeply with the characters on the page. Many attribute this quality of their work as the reason why Clamp titles are so timeless. Others attribute their meshing of conventions of shonen and shoujo manga to create a unique blend that is universally enjoyable. I feel like I've talked a lot about Clamp art in this video, and I haven't actually looked at their consistent stylistic choices with you guys. I've just assumed you know what I'm talking about. So let's lay down the groundwork here. Maybe I should have done this earlier in the video, but you know. Clamp's works are known for the long, stretched out characters that ignore typical human proportions in favor of stylized slenderness. That's the main notable characteristic that transcends most works Clamp has been involved with. There's also a lot of movement in their artwork, flowing hair, clothes that drape nicely. Their common themes of duality and balance between light and dark also plays a huge role into their design choices. How characters can contrast the settings they exist in. Clothing in Clamp also works to serve more as decoration to the characters that complement or reflect their arcs and priorities. It's not just something the character wears, but an intentional choice that tells us something about the character or their world. And while all of these things can and definitely are true for other manga artists as well, Clamp just does it in a very specific way. And there's also just a certain vibe to Clamp works that I struggle to explain in words. And maybe it's because I'm not educated enough in art theory to really convey this, but I'll try my best. Their art embodies what I think of when I think of older animated manga. Shoujo manga in the 90s just look like that. But Clamp's specific style stands out. Maybe it's the extremes in their detail or the exact way they do their eyes. There's something that ties all of Clamp's art together, and yeah, I'm aware that the fact that art just does that when it's drawn by the same people isn't like something that sets this group apart, but it's so distinctive, more so than just, oh, it's drawn by the same person. It's intentionally distinctive. And it's like looking at 70s shoujo manga for me. There's certain conventions and design choices that come together and just scream at you, hey, I'm a shoujo manga from the 70s. And Clamp's artwork does the same thing. It yells at me, hey, I'm Clamp. And yeah, maybe it's just pattern recognition. And that's also why I have a hard time describing it other than the vibe is just there. But I feel like after all the Clamp art you have seen in this video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Not only did Clamp's artwork serve as a distinctive factor, they also dared to explore identities that were often left unexplored. Clamp dared to showcase queer characters in their works when those identities were often relegated to niche genres like BL or Yuri. They explored identity and gay relationships for the sake of exploring them, and included these identities in works that did not focus on them, bringing representation to a broader audience. The decision to depict same-sex attraction in Cardcaptor Sakura was a big deal, showing Sakura, the main character, having a crush on her female teacher, showcasing the romantic relationship between Sakura's brother Toya and his friend-turned-partner Yukido. These dynamics represent whole worlds outside of the heteronormativity we're often taught, and it's important for kids to understand that some people are like that, and that it's okay if they're also like that. Giving the main character of Rig Veda a non-binary identity is equally important and revolutionary. Hell, it's still a big deal now. Do you know how hard it is to find non-binary characters in fiction? Especially fiction that isn't entirely about the person's gender identity. I know there are like 2 manga series that are often recommended for people looking for non-binary representation, and they're both just about like, yeah, I'm non-binary, what are you gonna do about it? And it's like, that's cool, love that, but sometimes I just want to read a story that's not about coming to terms with an identity that I already have come to terms with, and I just want to see myself represented in stories that have nothing to do with being non-binary. Does that make sense? Characters like these can be instrumental in people discovering or understanding their own identities, and in that sense, Clamp has been highly influential. I personally know many people who were first exposed to queer identities through Clamp's work, who learned that genders other than binary male and female existed, that the same-sex love was an option, that people could love others regardless of their gender. Clamp left a mark on queer anime fans in the 2000s, and that should not be ignored. And I think it's important to have these conversations and to have these types of characters in series that people not necessarily looking for queer representation will still be exposed to. There's something beautiful about coming across this kind of representation in an organic form and not searching out self-discovery stories of people coming to terms with their queer identities. While those stories are nice, sometimes you just need to learn something exists by pure accident. And that was the case for many of my friends and their experiences with queer identities in Clamp's work. And it really left a mark on them because it was often something that they came across when they were really young and hadn't quite started figuring themselves out yet. But having that baseline of, oh, it's just like that one character in that one Clamp series, was something that was helpful for them once they started to get a little bit older, maybe go through puberty, and understand the ways that they were different from their cis heteronormative peers. While there's not one single series or creator I can point to and say, that's it! That's the one that made queer identities more normalized and easier to publish stories about. I can say that every single person who put in the work to depict LGBT identities with any ounce of respect has helped lay the groundwork for creating more stories that feature LGBT people in any capacity. American cartoon fans often say that Voltron walked so that She-Ra could run, and it's the same premise. Each generation of storytellers continue to push back against conservative or oppressive boundaries, allowing the people that come after them to tell more in-depth stories about marginalized identities, to tell these stories on a more general and mainstream scale than just niche genres dedicated to specific types of relationships. Clamp put in the work to bring queer identities in front of the masses, and that will always be notable and important. But representation doesn't just stop with queer characters. Being an all-woman group is also a big deal. Much of the manga industry is dominated by men, and the misogyny within the industry has been very well documented. Again, Colleen Manga Rex does talk about this a little bit in their videos, and that's mostly what I'm drawing from. While it is true many female mangaka are able to find success, especially within shoujo and josei demographics, many of the editors and supervisors they work with are still men, and historically, even shoujo manga was made predominantly by men. So it's notable to see a successful group of women creating manga across all demographics, and to see their work be held up and praised across the board. Clamp's works are good, and that should have nothing to do with their gender. But in some circles, their works would be considered good despite the fact that they are women. I'm not here to argue the state of misogyny in Japan, nor do I care to argue the state of misogyny within the anime and manga fan communities. I fear most people who watch my videos are normal people. So they'll understand what I'm saying and that it's worth mentioning without wanting to be like, actually, men are oppressed because shoujo exists. I've seen people say stuff like that. And I thank you guys for being normal. When there is an industry that you are passionate about, it is encouraging to see people like you succeed within that industry. It is important for children to see people they can identify with as a way to learn what all is possible for them. Ideally, anything is possible for any one of us. We could all do whatever we wanted. However, we are often led in certain directions based on things like gender, because stereotypes and gender roles exist. Men are often pushed away from caregiving or teaching or anything that is seen as too feminine, and women are pushed away from STEM and other industries that are predominantly male. Seeing Clamp can inspire younger girls to chase their dreams of creating manga, to have their voices be heard just like Clamp's voices were heard, like any mangaka who has found success. Representation matters, and that goes beyond the fictional characters on the screen or in the page. It applies to the people making these stories as well, telling their perspectives and sharing their unique voices. And in that regard, Clamp will always be iconic, and for as long as the concept of misogyny exists, Clamp is gonna be pretty damn important for aspiring mangaka who might also be women. So, like, love that for them. That's been my little hyperfixation, deep dive, kind of into Clamp. I did the best that I could with the sources that I could find in English. So, like, keep that in mind. I'm just so fascinated with anime and manga from, I guess, the period of time before I got into anime and manga and the things that were around when I was just getting into anime and manga in the, like, 2010s, early 2010s. And that includes Clamp. I just think it's neat. I think the early era of anime and manga getting popular in America is just really cool to look at. And that's what we did. Anyway, thank you guys for watching my Clamp video. I don't know what my next video is going to be about, but we'll find out together, I guess. Whatever it is, I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye!